Welcome to Beyond the Backlog, where we look at thrilling tales of gaming triumphs, both past and present, exploring the strategies, challenges, and unforgettable moments that shape the ever-evolving landscape of our digital adventures. I'm Nick.
And I'm Zach.
And today we're going to go over some games that we beat in March this year. Something
Awesome.
quick and easy.
Before we do, any big releases in March that intrigue you? I think the only one we kind of both, or that you mentioned before we started recording, was Princess Peach Showtime.
Yeah, it's a Nintendo game, so that's always just higher up on the list, right?
Yeah, it gets more attention from us as longtime Nintendo fans. But I think the general consensus is that the style is fantastic, but the substance is lacking.
Yeah.
And depending on what side of the debate you fall on, it's either they're playing really hard into this, like it's a stage production style presentation, but it's at the end of the day just a one button to perform your action per level, and that kind of simplistic. But I think I would still enjoy playing it. I just don't know if I'm going to pick it up until it's on sale at some time.
That's what I was just going to say. It's a sale one, and maybe try it out, see if you like it, but it's not a day one purchase by any means.
All right. I guess if there's nothing else we want to talk about in terms of news in March, we'll dive right into our games that we've beaten. So my first one, I decided I was going to pop in the Super Nintendo for most of the month. And one of the first games I beat was Kirby Superstar. So when we did our top Super Nintendo games, I actually put that on my top 10 list. And this was my first time playing through. And if you were to even look on Wikipedia, they call it an anthology platformer.
Yeah.
And that is one of the big compelling features, is this variety in game style. And it is done by HAL Laboratory, and you have Masahiro Sakurai, who we know went on to do the Smash Bros games. And you can see a lot of that DNA in this game. The Great Cave Offensive and how it has the branching paths and hidden treasures, or Revenge of the Meta Knight and how it has this very cinematic cutscene style, and just the way you transition from level to level reminds me a lot of Subspace Emissary in Smash Brawl.
Yeah.
Other than that, the multiplayer system is fantastic, because you have this buddy system, and somebody else on a second controller could start controlling that buddy at any time.
I would say one of the best from the Super Nintendo.
Oh,
I find it way more compelling and way better than the Donkey Kong games or Mario World even, where it's really just a single player game. You're just trading off.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of platformers that have that just drop in, drop out sort of cooperative gameplay, we didn't see that until several generations of console later. And other than that, it is just that basic Kirby gameplay, and it's done exceptionally well. And most of what we think of Kirby moving forward came from this game. And I think it's a good one to return to regardless of how you play it, because there is the DS port as well.
Yes.
But other than that, if you're interested in our deep dive thoughts into it, I would check out the top Super Nintendo games.
Yeah, it definitely is on there. It's a great one. It's just fun.
Mm-hmm.
But my first one I didn't play a lot this month that I beat, but one that I did do is a friend and I finally tackled the Ocarina of Time Majora's Mask combination randomizer that they had.
Did you just do one rando?
Yeah, so when we do it we do it online. We do one seed, and then we just chat with each other throughout it, let us know what checks we've done so that we can kind of skip through and have it go by a little bit faster. But basically how it works is all of the items from both games are shuffled up in between the games. And then the Happy Mask Salesman shop in Ocarina Child, you enter that and it goes into Majora's Mask.
Right.
So that brings you into Clock Town.
Have you been watching a lot of, say, ZFG likes to do this, Linkus,
every so often, for general randomizers, yes.
Yeah,
but I haven't seen it
for Phil. I've seen all of them do that cross randomizer.
Yeah, it's really fun because it's just another layer to it. And I don't know if it necessarily makes me appreciate Majora's Mask more, but I kind of understand it a little bit better.
Oh, so we're going to do our top 10 Zeldas again, and you're going to put Majora's Mask way up higher?
No. So some of the issues that I have with it, with Ocarina of Time, you have like a quick camera work that you can just go right behind. Majora's Mask, you have to press and hold, or else it does the quick work and then switches it back. It's just really weird for that. But the fact that the cycling is there kind of helps out in randomizers, because you can just jump ahead, kind of do a couple checks there, and then just stop the cycle and then go back to it. The downside to something like that, though, is you lose all of your consumables in both games.
Like when you reset in Majora's Mask, like you lose all things in bottles and like
I like your arrows,
bombs, counts and stuff in both of them.
Yeah, because they're tied together. So if you find the bow, you just find the bow. You don't find Ocarina's bow and Majora's bow.
So how long did it take roughly to finish?
Oh God, I don't even know, because it was a multi-day, like solid days playing. So probably around like the 12-hour mark.
Fair enough.
Because we do keys as well, so all the keys are jumbled up. So you got to find, all 5 keys to get through Forest, as an example. But it's fun. It's one really good game, one game that people also like and I don't, kind of just mashed together.
Well, I was just talking about needing to get a new computer. Maybe I'll be right there doing some randomizers with you soon.
Hey, they're fun.
All right, let's dive into the second game that I want to talk about, and that is The Addams Family on Super Nintendo, which is another platformer, but this one's made by Ocean Software, and it was pretty early on in the Super Nintendo life cycle, so like 1991. But this company is pretty well known. I don't know how well known, but they're pretty well associated with kind of those licensed platformers from the 80s and 90s. Like if you have like the Flintstone games from like the original Nintendo.
Oh, okay. Yep.
On like Super Nintendo, they did like Dennis the Menace or Hook, or like they even had things like RoboCop and like Terminator, like all these sci-fi properties. So they mostly dealt with licensed stuff or arcade ports. If you want to look at something that's more of like an original work, I think the only thing I could find on the Switch online service was Jelly Boy on Super Nintendo. They had a hand in that.
Oh, okay. Yep.
So not necessarily known for their top end games, but I think that out of that kind of B tier of basic platforming slop that came out for most of the 80s and 90s, The Addams Family actually stands out as quite a good one.
Yeah, it's one of the ones that I've even heard of. It's like, yeah, I know it's a tie-in game, but like still check it out.
Oh, and Micro Machines. They also had a hand in Micro Machines, if you've ever played that. But in The Addams Family, you're playing as Gomez, the father of the family, and your goal is just to save the rest of the family who's been kidnapped to be held hostage for their like wealth. It does have like that generic kind of feel of some of those licensed platformers. And like the controls can be a little slippery. Like your momentum can feel a little off if you're trying to jump on things in sequence. But when the enemies kind of like match the theme of the area you're going for, like it works really well. So for example, like there's the whole game has kind of a horror theme to it. But like a good example would be in the kitchen, there's the freezer you can go through, which has like snowmen and like penguins and stuff that you can dodge. And like the big boss fight at the end is like a snowman that is throwing snowballs at you. Whereas on the other side of the kitchen is Granny's oven, which once you go into is full of little fire sprites that are jumping back and forth and lots of like flame walls and instant death traps. So despite having this generic feel of like we're just exploring the house, they kind of pack a good variety of level themes in there. Some of the like later, more difficult ones are like the playroom, which is a bunch of execution devices, and they play to that theme well, like guillotines to like avoid, or like axes swinging back and forth across the screen to avoid.
And I figure this all fits in with like the style of the Addams Family, right?
Yeah. And honestly, for being kind of a generic platformer, some of the pixel work they put into it is phenomenal. Like the portraits of the actual family members themselves were done by one artist in particular. And I even watched like a documentary sort of about this person, and they put like, these are some of the most amazing looking pixel art you can see on the Super Nintendo. But in terms of the game itself, you can play through, like, you start in the middle of the mansion and you can pick whatever door you want to go through, save whatever family member, whatever order you want to. And I think that's super cool because you don't get that kind of open-ended adventure from a lot of like 2D platformers back in the day.
At some point, it was maybe pick one of two. And then that's it.
But quite literally, you could save any of the 5 members in any order. And then some of the other areas are just to unlock more health upgrades. So I would say there's 8 different sections. 3 of them are for health upgrades. 5 are to save family members. And you can do them however you want. And I love that. And they give you quite a few lives right at the start. Like there's a secret hidden area right next to the start where you can just pick up like 20 lives, which seems like, oh my God, this is overkill and this game is going to be super easy. But I feel like that's like the perfect amount to get to the end of some of these stages. Like they're quite a gauntlet of traps and hazards, and you can die very quickly. So I feel like it's pretty well balanced, and there's just like tons of little secrets and hidden paths and alternative ways to get places that have made it so, like, I have beaten this game like 3 or 4 times before, and each time I'm doing it more efficiently and on different like routes and paths to get through, because you kind of figure out like what's harder. You want all of the like life extension upgrades first, right? Yeah. You kind of get that. You like learn to understand it, and I think it's a game that is great to understand and a lot of fun to replay too.
Yeah, especially going through efficiently and trying to shorten it up. Anyone that focuses on speed, you kind of go through and you're like, oh, okay, this way. And that's just always a fun little boost as someone who, when they're complete the story, they're like, cool, I'm done. I am much more likely to go back and play through like platformers to try to get just that little bit faster. Yeah, and like
I've played quite a few Super Nintendo games, and some I wouldn't recommend to just anyone, but I'm like, if maybe not, again, this is not like a Mario Kirby level platformer, but
yeah,
if you've played all those, I would say like this would be pretty high up on my suggestions of like hidden gems.
Yeah. Now, would you say makes like a long list of your top Super Nintendo games, or?
I mean, there's so many good Super Nintendo games. We might be looking in like rank 20 to 30 probably.
Oh, okay. So whenever we do like a long video, when we beat all the Super Nintendo games, that's where we go with that.
Absolutely.
But my last one, well, we had a couple that we kind of played together, and we'll kind of do group thoughts on that. But I beat Okami. That was one of my 12 and 12s that I decided to do for March. 2006 game made by Clover Studio. They're the guys that did Beautiful Joe and all of like their kind of expansion games. Capcom was like the overbody that published it.
I never put the 2 and 2 together, but I'm thinking of the art style of Beautiful Joe and the art style of Okami. I'm like, I feel like they definitely go hard on some of those, using the art style specifically to tell the story or enhance the gameplay.
I read it and I went, yeah, that makes sense. But I was told growing up that it was the closest thing to like a Zelda game without it being a Zelda game. And I can kind of see their point, right? Like it was very similar to like a Twilight Princess-esque kind of thing, right? Wolf.
I was going to say beyond like you play as the wolf.
Yeah.
Like the whole time though.
Yes. Yeah, you play as the wolf the whole time. There's lots of references to Japanese mythology. Way too many for me to even take a look at. But, I remember way back in the day watching an old Chugga Conroy series, and they went over each individual one and like, yeah, it's part of this story and this and that. It's great. It has, like, as you said, like this watercolor paintbrush style. It's just really nice to look at. I did it on the PS4, so the HD remake, which adds a little bit more. But I would say, I would think the best way to play the game is on the Wii.
And that's how I own it. I've never actually played it though.
And it's just how you attack and how you do things is with a paintbrush, right? So when you attack enemies, you kind of pause time a little bit and you make a stroke through them to like slash them, other than your standard like beat 'em up gameplay. right? Square or X is your basic attack, and you can jump and attack and all that kind of stuff.
So to control the paintbrush, use the right stick on the PlayStation controller?
Yeah, so you hold, I think R1, you press and hold that, and then you just move the right stick across and you hit X to like put the paintbrush down.
Okay. And did that feel like at least proper kind of sensitivity and whatnot?
Yeah, it had proper sensitivity to it. It just kind of felt like I see what they were trying to do with the paintbrush. So I think it also came out on PS2 at the same time.
Oh, yeah.
And that would have just been a little bit more funky to deal with. But then your upgrades basically give you new drawings. So you go through and you make a different symbol and then it makes bombs. Or you make the different symbol and it gives you fire or ice, etc. But if there's a critique to it, because I really liked the game, it's a little bit too collect-a-thon-y. Right? So there's a lot of things to just pick up if you want to 100% the game.
Is there like motivation to 100% it though?
Kind of.
Like if you just go through picking up what is on the path or just off the path, are you going to beat the game?
Yeah. Yeah, there's some of the things give you like extra health, right? You kind of get your makeshift heart pieces. You get 3 of them. You get a new solar ring. But in terms of like, there's these little stray beads that you have to get, and there's like 100 of them. And I don't really know if it's that worth it. It's on PS4, so it's more worth it than the Wii, where it gives you a trophy. So you get that little bit of a dopamine hit.
Oh boy, that would be a topic for another video.
Yeah, exactly.
Trophies that, why did we 100% those?
Yeah. And it's another one, you'll find it with some adventure games where they just toss in random mini games. This one's was fishing. And I just don't want to sit there and fish to get all the different types of fish.
But like, how in depth is the fishing mini game? Are we talking like Zelda depth? Are we talking like Sega Bass fishing depth?
A little bit more than Zelda. It's not just an A button. You have to move the right stick in the opposite direction of where the fish is going. So it's just kind of annoying, but it's just also just tedious.
Fair enough.
I'd give it like an 8. It's a solid game.
Like I'm thinking of from a Zelda game specifically, like in Phantom Hourglass, you literally have to balance how much the fish is pulling on and make sure you're pulling to the left or right side of the screen, but you're constantly stroking downwards to keep reeling in. Oh yeah, there isn't anything with reeling in for that. You'll just reach a point because you're a god, right? So you're kind of helping other people fish. And then it reaches a point where the fish jumps up and you slash it and then they can catch the fish themselves. But there's a little health meter depending on who you're fishing with. Okay. And then if you go too hard, they just lose health. And then either the fish gets away or he'll let go of the rod, things like that. But not to sidetrack you too much here. No. It was a good game. 8 out of 10, I'd say. I'm glad I played it. I don't know if I'll replay it again anytime soon. Because it is quite a substantial game, too. Yeah, I think I was looking at about 45 hours. Now this is getting most of everything. Too. Yeah, I might be wrong, but I remember somebody mentioning like it was pretty similar to Twilight Princess in length. Yeah. Where it was like there is about 8, 9 different like dungeon, quote unquote. Yeah, some of them are shorter, some of them are longer, but that's about the average for it. And games like that, like I said earlier, when you get into story-based games, I'm not as inclined to replay them. Because I'm like, oh, I experienced the story. This is great. But then if I forget them, I'm like, we'll play it again. Fair enough. All right. Let me dive into my penultimate choice for this episode, and that is Pilot Wings on the Super Nintendo, the very first in the series. And I think the first thing that most people associate with this game is the Mode 7. And it was kind of like the launch title for the Super Nintendo, made by Nintendo, that was showing off Mode 7 running. And it is, at its core, a flight simulator. It's not like an in-depth flight simulator, though. It has more of that arcadey kind of feel to it, where you're just trying to finish a level that takes 3 minutes or so. And if you don't get a good score, you do it again until you do. Yeah, you're not a pilot then. No. You're not trying to actually like become a fully licensed pilot here. It's not like no Microsoft Flight Simulator levels of intense like something could go wrong, slow gameplay. Here we're looking at 4 different types of main events you can do. So there's hang gliding. You get a rocket belt that you like just kind of fly around through hoops and have to land. You have a light plane, which is typically just navigating through rings. And you have skydiving challenges where it's falling vertically through rings and then making sure you parachute land properly. And they do get tougher as you go through, but especially if you wanted to play it on the Super Nintendo online service for Switch, having that replay feature is very handy because I was going to get bored if I had to play the same 5-minute mission over and over just to perfect my landing. So if I was going to get a really bad score, I would just back it up 30 seconds and just come up with a little better approach and just get myself through the game at a little better clip because it is known for being very hard.
I do think, as a quick side note, the fact that Switch Online has that backup feature, the rewind, has saved a lot of older games.
Oh yeah, like this is not a game I think is fast-paced, interesting, looks good and clear enough to go back to and try and I was going to say the word suffer through on original hardware, but it's not that bad. But it is difficult to try, especially if you want to try and get like perfect scores on anything, which I'm not interested in. I got enough to pass through. Beyond that, like as I said, the environments themselves don't really feel particularly like they stand out or you'll remember where you were landing. For the most part, they're just island shapes with like a runway here, a helipad here. So you do your objectives and then land on the runway. But when you're doing your actual objectives, you're like looking up in the air. So you're mostly just following a series of dots and not like learning about the environment. And that's something that I think the other 2 games in the series, like on Nintendo 64 and 3DS, did really well, is you got to learn the actual map you were on.
Yeah.
But this one is just a couple of generic, like rectangular to square shaped islands that are just landing pads more than anything.
It's like a stripped down version because they just had no other way to do it.
Yeah. Like technically very impressive.
Yeah.
I still think it's worth checking out, but definitely give it a shot on the online if you can.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now we're going to get into one that we played together and then kind of just dropped. We kind of said, you know what, we had our time with it. It's a game. That's Banjo-Kazooie Nuts and Bolts. I believe when we talked about this on the show before, we were cautiously optimistic about the game.
Mm-hmm.
We were like, oh, it's not so bad. Like, you know, we didn't think it was awful because reading anyone talk about it is just like the worst thing ever.
And I think for the price it's going for, like there is still some fun to be had.
Yeah. Yeah. For like I don't know, say $10.
Yeah. Like if you're going to get more than an hour or 2 out of it, and I'd still say give it a look.
Yeah. And I wouldn't even say that the game really got worse. It just didn't, it stagnated.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're like, this is kind of what the game had to offer.
And especially because we kind of came back to it after a week or 2, it was almost like, let's learn the controls again, and then trying to like move, like you unlock levels by moving the ball to a certain area on the map to like open up a door, but like just trying to get that ball there was such a hassle.
Yeah, they made a point A to point B when like they didn't need to. Mm-hmm. Could have just been like, hey, here's this new unlock, go get her. And then I appreciate what they tried with the vehicle components of it, but it's just really janky. Mm-hmm. It's like you're playing an adventure game, but you've got to constantly drive everywhere, and it's just really weird, and it just doesn't hit for what.
Yeah, I don't feel like there's a connection between here's the objective that I need to complete and here's the type of vehicle that will get me there.
Yeah. Yeah, it feels like they did too much with it. Because it's like you either give us a couple vehicles that kind of fit basic needs, or you have it be this whole vehicle customization game and then just go from there. They kind of did both, slapped Banjo and Kazooie on it, made some adventure points, and then said go. And I think it just tried to do way too much because it still had some of that banjo charm.
Yeah, but I do, if I recall correctly, I'm pretty sure most of the team from Rare that worked on like Nintendo 64, Super Nintendo games was largely not a part of the company after the Microsoft acquisition.
Yeah, most likely. But yeah, it's certainly something. I'm glad we played it to actually get a good opinion on it. But from now on, it's just like, well, yeah, we'll just go back to Kazooie or Tooie or anything like that.
All right. And my last one I talked about was part of my 12 games in 12 months that I wanted to beat, RPGs specifically. So while I had the Super Nintendo out, I decided I would pop in some Earthbound. Now, this game definitely has a bit of a legacy. Been teased by Nintendo a lot in recent years as hey, we acknowledge that this game existed and there's fans out there, but we're not going to give you more of what you want. This particular game, though, was developed by Ape Incorporated, who is the original developer of Mother, but then also had HAL Laboratory with them, which makes sense when you kind of see that like slapstick comedy and some of those scenes that play out is very reminiscent of something like Kirby. And I think it is very slow at first, and they present it like a movie where it's like...
That's a good point, yeah.
Like, it doesn't start with like a cutscene with crazy things happening. It's like, it's just you going to sleep and then like a sound outside, and you hear like a crash and a rumble, but then it like fades to black, and then it's you still in bed again, and oh, there's a knock at your door, and you like get up out of bed to go like check it. Like it's very slow paced, and they focus on trying to get you familiar with the characters at a good pace. Like right away, I was blown away by the sense of humor, though.
Me too. I recorded maybe like 30 minutes of it just to get footage for this. And I just found even any of the individual like police officers or anything like that, they just had enough humor to them where they're like, this is just, I know it's going to be a fun time. We've come up from a place where we haven't ever played the game, right?
Yeah, so neither of us have played it. And if you aren't familiar with the game, like it is a traditional like JRPG on the surface.
Yeah.
But mix that with like very Western ideas of like what's cool and silly and fun. Like you can tell it was like some Japanese people who were inspired to kind of play off of like Western culture.
Yeah.
And they made something just never before seen. Like some of the enemies you fight and just like even the dialogue when you're fighting it, like at the very beginning, you pick up your neighbor to go investigate this meteorite crash, and he doesn't attack, but it's like every turn it'll be like pokey, hidden fear, and then will be like no damage given. Just so even just reading the dialogue in the battles is intriguing enough to keep you going. But I did find myself getting bored for quite a long stretch in the middle because you learn the basics of how to control your one character, but then it just doesn't build on that for a long time.
Yeah.
So even though there's all this unique dialogue and like, I know now that I've beaten the game that it was trying to stay normal and plain as long as possible, just so that when it gets crazy wackadoo at the end, it's even more like out of nowhere and impactful to the player. But for a while, I wasn't having to grind, but at the same time, I was never finding myself challenged. Like, it was very easy for a good long while.
Yeah.
But that's where the change happened. So you have 4 characters. Ness is who you mainly play as, and he's kind of like a tank, but is just overall strong. Then you get Paula, whose specialty is using the PSI powers, and she has a good mix of like magic attacks that will hit all enemies or hit a row of enemies or put them to sleep, things like that. And then you get Jeff, and he was the first one I was like, I don't really know what to do with this guy. But you pick up a bunch of items specifically throughout the game, and you have a very limited inventory, but Jeff can use a couple of items. Some are reusable. So like one sucks health from your opponent. One will like spray cotton around or goop or whatever it is to like slow down all of your opponents. So you can choose to swap out some of like the healables and consumables or like key items and not put them on Jeff so that he can have an inventory full of battle items. And that's his specialty. Like if you look at Smash Brothers, and his trophy is him unleashing a bunch of rockets.
Yeah.
And so later on in the game, like you stock them up with rockets and unleash them on some of the big enemies. And that is one of your best ways to take on a bunch of these like HP tanks later on. And then your final character is Pooh. And again, like after you get your first 3 characters, like there was almost 10 hours of gameplay before you get the last one. Or maybe I just felt like it was 10 hours because I felt like I was going very slow.
Yeah.
And he's honestly not that strong. He doesn't have the greatest magic abilities, but he's fast.
Oh, okay.
And so once I got him in my party, it kind of started to click because I started realizing that the kind of interaction between the characters in the battle is the core of like the skill and like the strategy here. So you'll have to deal with multiple status effects later on and actually be pushed to the point where you're going to run out of health and kind of balance who can, like if your guy that has the like reviving items gets knocked out, you can't use those reviving items. So you have to be careful about who has them and when you use them, and just the fact like Pooh, his other thing is he can't be healed by normal items. You need specific ones for him. And at that point you have to start predicting like the order that enemies are going to attack and who they might attack. So you can plan, all right, if I get my turn done quickly because the health counters are constantly rolling down. You're like, if I can do this quickly, Pooh will attack first. They'll attack here, but his counter will still be going down. So he'll get another chance to attack and end the battle before they all die.
Yeah.
And as soon as I got to that point where you're playing to stay alive while recognizing like how quickly you need to act. So it becomes like timing and like choosing the right character for the right ability at the right time. Like it just clicked. It clicked and I was having so much fun, but then it's over.
Okay. Yep.
So I really, really enjoyed it for like 5 hours.
Yeah.
It just took 35 hours to get to the point I was loving it.
And then it becomes, was that worth it?
I mean, the finale is just pure chaos. Yeah. And I think it is something that you need to experience because no other game is ever going to be that wild at the end. And it really does like pull on your heartstrings. It does bring in every single species, every single like main character you've met along the way. Like you get to know them and they all come together at the finale and it's epic and awesome. Just it took so long.
Yeah.
But that's my thing about RPGs is I end up falling in love with them. I just hate how long it takes to fall in love with them.
Well, and it seems like Earthbound's interesting because most of the JRPGs that I'll play, your skill expression is more how you build the teams, right? What roles you pick and what abilities that you give them. Whereas with Earthbound, you've kind of been given all of that, and then you have to go, okay, now figure it out.
Yeah, and that's where you take so long kind of learning how Ness and Paula interact together, and you're just the two of them for a while. And then once you add another one in, like, it doesn't feel like it's mixing it up.
Yeah.
And that's where I'm like, it wasn't until I had all four and we're actually being challenged and pushed to the point that if I don't have a way to heal this one thing, then I'm like stuck with it for several battles. And like one of them is like, it makes your party members attack their own party members. So having something like that and not having a way to heal it is like do I have to like literally retreat and do this whole thing again? Or do I have a way to make it through and finding that way to make it through really pulled me in.
Yeah. And you just feel much better when you did it. You're like, I did this.
Which is something that I haven't gotten from a lot of RPGs.
Not a whole lot of them, no.
Because a lot of the time I do feel like I'm just following a guide and doing what the guide says, but even the guides for Earthbound fall into this. We're just going to give you the general idea. Just use like Ness's like PK ability here, and it'll do a lot more damage, but they don't tell you what to do with the rest of your team or how often.
Like, here's the starting point.
Yeah, like it is so like it's impossible to say like step for step what's going to happen in a battle, and I love that. Like I actually learned how to play the game.
Now I think this is going to be the last bit on it. We got together, we did some SNES Rapid Fire, just a couple smaller games that we can talk about for a couple minutes on it. First one that I think I'm going to take a look at, NBA Jam. So,
yes,
shockingly, basketball game. It's a fun little
He's on
game.
fire.
Yeah. Just take all the corner threes, and then we're all set.
Oh, right. I forgot that we played against each other, and you literally just were whooping my butt because every single shot you were making was right from the corner.
Yeah, and then they just went in. It was great. It's a fun game, but it's one of those, like with a lot of sports games, you play it maybe 3-4 times max, and then you're like, cool, this is it. From like a short perspective, you should really only be playing these games like half hour. Especially like SNES era ones. They just don't have the substance to really keep going.
Well, that's right. I think compared to some sports games nowadays that are like trying to be so fine-tuned and perfected and like realistic systems as much as possible. Like this is very much an arcade game.
Yeah, but we also, we're 30 years out, give or take, from when these players played in. We don't have any type of connection to them.
Yeah, but I think of it more like when I'm playing ice hockey on the original Nintendo.
Yeah.
And like that is meant to just be played for a round or two and then put down.
Exactly. Yeah. It was fun while we did it. Definitely one that I'd consider going back to as like a quick, warm up, and then we'll get into something like harder kind of thing.
Yeah, but I don't think either of us have that history of, having a friend over when we were kids to play NBA Jam for hours.
No, most I had with basketball would have been a little bit of NBA Street. And that one is just, you had Mario, Luigi, and Peach in it as options, and that was just kind of cool. Next one we did was quick little look at Tetris Attack. Also fun. I appreciated how they did the difficulty. Right? Because Tetris Attack, you play against another player and you just kind of Tetris each other.
For those who don't know, Tetris Attack is not traditional Tetris gameplay where blocks are falling from the top.
It's more like a Puyo Puyo, right?
Yeah, so it's panel de pawn in
that's it. Yeah,
in Japan, and it's like blocks are rising from below, and you have to swap adjacent blocks to try and create rows of 3. But it's not like a Bejeweled sort of thing where you either swap or where it's like you have to swap to make a thing. Is like you can literally swap it all across a row to build up crazy combos.
Yeah, you can swap with nothing. But they have a difficulty adjustment per player. So me, as someone who didn't really play the game, isn't really a puzzle player, I could play at like difficulty 2, whereas Zach was playing at difficulty, I think it was 8. Maybe 9.
It was.
Yeah. And that was the point where we're like, okay, this is like a good back and forth.
And it is kind of fun trying to find that perfect spot too, because it's like you playing on 1 and me on 7. I had no.
Yeah, you had no chance.
No chance.
Quick and easy for it.
But then we did 2 and 7, and I was whooping the floor with you.
Yeah.
And then we did 2 and 8, and it felt like either of us could have won.
Yeah, it went from like 30-second, 45-second matches to like 2.5, 3-minute matches.
And they even, to kind of force the game along after like a 3-minute mark, it starts playing faster.
Yeah.
And the blocks will start rising just like constantly at a steady pace from the bottom, just to like force somebody to lose quickly.
Exactly, yeah. And then if it doesn't work, you're just kind of like, well. That's it. And then the last one I kind of wanted to touch on because we did beat it was Turtles in Time, TMNT 4.
Oh, yeah.
And it was fun. It was the game though that made me realize I just don't really like beat 'em ups.
Man, I don't even remember what game we played back in the day when we were doing a GameCube Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle game.
Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Battle Nexus.
Yeah, and that was like 4 hours of like you're just mashing the same combos.
Yeah.
But I remember you saying like you had played it before and with other people and kind of had a soft spot for it, even though it's not necessarily agreed upon as a all-time classic. And I think I feel a lot more strongly about Turtles in Time as like this is a classic for a reason, and it's so succinct and to the point. But as a beat 'em up type game, it's not about just mashing buttons though. This one is about proper spacing to because if you're well spaced and have like the enemies all focused on one side, then you could pull off a crazy like whipping the enemy back and forth combo or throw them at the screen and not get like tagged from behind and beat up that way. So I think I also don't like beat 'em ups per se. But Turtles in Time is the beat 'em up I like.
I will say too, compared to the TMNT arcade game, leaps and bounds better than that Turtles in Time, right? Because it's a lot more free flowing. It feels a lot more not as constricted.
Yeah, one of the rare scenarios where as a port from the arcade, it was actually enhanced on console with more content.
Yeah. But I think we maybe beat it maybe an hour, maybe a little bit less.
Yeah, like it is 10 levels and maybe 45 minutes to beat on easy difficulty.
Yeah.
I've beaten enough times on easy. I think I would give it a shot on normal, but maybe another time.
Oh, exactly. And I just think like on the notes of beat 'em ups, I wonder if it's now we have more to beat 'em ups now, right? Like the Devil May Cries, the Bayonettas, I kind of consider them beat 'em ups still, just augmented. That it's a little bit harder to go back to it without having that big nostalgia kick.
And I think a beat 'em up by nature should be short.
Yes.
And I think Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles kind of hits that sweet spot for me of if it was any longer, I'd be like, all right, we can wrap this up. I've seen what there is to see.
Yeah, you could maybe get away with another level. I don't think you could do more than one, though. But that's what we did in March. Bit of a slower month. I have a feeling April's going to be fairly slow as well.
What, you mean I have exams and stuff?
Well, and it went from winter to spring.
Yes.
Right? More time outside. Who knows what we might do.
Keeping busy, but we love the hobby. So obviously we're always playing games, always got things going on the side.
Yeah, exactly. And we just keep trying to bring this stuff out to you.
Yeah. Let us know what you played in the last month if you can. And
that's it. That's all. We'll see you next time.
Yeah. Thank you for listening.